Are you aching for a love that will never leave? A presence that will push back the dark? If so, I have good news for you. God's love is relentless, even when your faith isn't. Welcome to the Relentless podcast, a 15-episode podcast designed to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the stories and biblical history that makes up the pages of my newest book, Relentless, the unshakable presence of a God who never leaves. My goal is simple. I want to do everything I can to help you feel less alone, and to help you discover solid evidence of God's presence in the middle of your story, even if your story doesn't look like you thought it would. Well, welcome back. This is episode 5. You're almost a third of the way through. Yay, episode 5. And we're talking about chapter 3, a ladder and a limp, a God who meets you where you are. This is all about the story of Jacob in the Bible, one of my favorite stories. I have a son named Jacob, so yeah, he kind of feels like the Bible is named after him. I try to let him know that actually that was named first, but he's 22. What are you going to do? But today we're talking all about looking for God, looking for God's presence in the places of your limp. We'll get to that in a moment. But I have a confession to make first. You ready for this? It's a big confession. It's kind of embarrassing. For those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram, and if you aren't, Enneagram is a means, it's one of the most accurate means of personality assessment, how we operate the way we do in relationship. And I spent some time learning about the Enneagram as part of my leadership development and the coaching and things that I do. But anyway, I have probably taken the Enneagram test, somewhere around 4 or 5 times. I keep taking it over and over again. Actually, that's probably too low of a number. Probably more like 6 or 7. I told you it was a confession. I keep taking it. Well, I haven't for a while, but originally I kept taking the test over and over and over again because I wanted a different result. I was not happy with the result of the test. And every time I took it, it kept giving me the same answer. And then I started skewing my answers because that's super helpful, right? Let's skew our answers to try to get a different result, because not having accurate information about ourselves is always so helpful. Not really. Okay. So I kept taking the Enneagram test again because I wanted to be something different. But before I tell you what my number is, I'll give you a hint. When I was growing up, if I had a day off from school, I would clean the entire house top to bottom. And sometimes I would make a multiple course dinner for my parents, even when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. My motive for these things is I wanted my parents to love me more. I wanted to make them happy. I wanted to please them. And if you haven't yet guessed, by just those 2 tiny examples, I am an Enneagram 2. The helper. Sad but true. Yes, I will exhaust myself trying to be loved. It's just it is so hardwired in me, and I've done a lot of work to be a very healthy 2. And I am so much farther along than I used to be. But there was a time where everything I did was, whether conscious or subconscious, I was trying to be loved. And so I would work so hard to take care of people and to love people and to serve them well. I would work to the point of my own exhaustion to try to do everything I could for everybody else, because I wanted to be loved. And I thought it would be selfish to not do those things, to take care of myself. Talk about dysfunctional, right? We all have our little dysfunctional patterns. Well, that was one of mine. In fact, even this past week, I felt it pop up because one of my older grown sons came home and I had a bunch of work to do, but I felt bad that I wasn't more available. He just popped home for the day to do laundry. Different story, different episode. But came home to do laundry, and I wanted to drop everything to take care of him. But the truth is, I had work responsibilities to do. And so I was caught in that tension between I did have a job to do, and that's okay, but also feeling like a terrible mom, quote unquote, because I wasn't able to drop everything and meet his every need. And so I thought, there we are, Enneagram 2 popping up again. And so I had to process through that and make a really good, healthy decision that took everybody's needs in consideration, not just his. So that's ongoing. Well, the story of Jacob in the Bible is really a story of dysfunctional patterns very similar to my own, right? There's manipulation and deceit, there's political maneuverings and opportunism, there's lying, there's covering up, there's a mom and dad playing favorites with their kids. It's just a big hot mess. And behind that are some dysfunctional patterns just like my own and like yours as well. But in the whole story of Jacob, we can see almost just about every kind of family dysfunction. We see generational pain. And if you look at other family stories in the Bible besides just Jacob's, you will see all kinds of abuse and neglect and lying and manipulation and abandonment and disregard and overprotectivism and just all kinds of stuff. And I actually find great comfort in the familial dysfunction in the Bible because it helps me to see that it's somewhat norm, right? We all have kind of complicated families, and it's on a continuum. Some are definitely more dysfunctional than others, but we all have patterns that don't serve us well. And then it ends up leaving its mark on us. In this chapter, I talk a lot about Jacob because he was the youngest of twins. I have a set of twins myself. The youngest of twins is his twin brother Esau was born first, but Jacob wanted to have the rights of the firstborn. So his mom chose Jacob as her favorite, and Esau was the favorite of the dad. So talk about a hot mess. Imagine going to parent-teacher conferences with them. No, thank you. I'd rather have my toenails plucked out. But it's a big mess. Jacob gets kind of full of himself. He wants the firstborn blessing. He lies and deceives his father in order to get it, and then makes his brother mad, and he has to run away. Then later in his story, we see just that repeating pattern of manipulation and deceit. But then we find this moment when Jacob meets God. And it's this crazy story of Jacob coming to a place of experiencing the presence of God. And one story in particular, he sleeps next to a river at night by himself. And the first dream he has is of a ladder reaching from heaven to earth. Just kind of this bizarre dream where he sees angels ascending and descending on this ladder reaching from heaven to earth. But the next story, and this is the one that really has impacted me, is an angel of the Lord, God himself in a sense, wrestles with Jacob all night long. And Jacob just hangs onto him like bulldog determination. Is not going to let him go. And when morning comes, this angel of the Lord wants to leave, and Jacob says, "Don't leave. I'm not going to let you leave till you bless me." And the angel does so, but also twists Jacob's hip so that way he has this wrench in his hip and he walks with a limp, right? And it's so interesting to me. I don't understand all the dynamics of this particular story, but a couple things stand out. First, Jacob is desperate for God. He's desperate for God. He just hangs on to him. Like I said, bulldog. He's so desperate for God. And even though he's got the firstborn blessing, he's got more money than he knows what to do with. He's doing very well, multiple wives. That's its own kind of crazy. But he has, in all intents and purposes, this good life, and yet he's missing something. And so he hangs on to God. He wrestles with God all night and hangs on to him. And in the process of that, hanging on, wrestling with faith, wrestling with God, he gets his hip wrenched and walks with a limp for the rest of his life, as far as we know. And I sit there and think how much like all of us that is, right? We want so much to believe in God. We want so much to hang on to God and to hang on to our faith. But the wrestling match that we engage in from now until the moment we die is a little bit messy, and it leaves us with a limp. It messes with us. And yet there's beauty in the hanging on to God and beauty in the wrestling. And I'm learning there's even beauty in the limp. All of those things are evidence of God's presence if we develop the eyes to see them. Now, the limp looks different in all of us, right? We all have different limps. And a couple ways this shows up, and we'll talk more about this in a later episode because we're going to talk about attachment styles and stuff like that, which is coming out in a later chapter. But the ways we show our limp. Some of us show our limp by insecurity and neediness and clingy or manipulative behaviors. Jacob certainly had a lot of that. Others of us show our limp, our kind of brokenness, or the thing that has wrenched us in withdrawal and detachment and isolation, and kind of like this kind of detachment from humanity, from others, and like a refusal to enter in and to engage. Other of us show our limp through defensive,ness, anger, revenge, retaliation, this kind of like hyper intensity, right? That we are just angry all the time. And all of those things can be difficult to deal with in other people, right? We want everybody else to give us a whole lot of grace for our limp, but yeah, we don't like people that walk with a limp. They're kind of annoying when they're clingy and needy, or when they're angry and vengeful and manipulative or deceitful, or they're detached or withdraw. We don't really like that. But all of this, when you start to look at it this way, all of these evidences of a limp are ways that we are wrestling through life, wrestling to find meaning and purpose, and maybe God in the middle of that. So now this is my question for you today. What is your limp? What is your limp? I, more than ever before, have had to accept the fact that I'm going to walk with a limp for the rest of my life. First of all, my physical challenges are inescapable. Even doing these podcasts, I'm finding myself like spitting. I'm drooling, spitting. I'm having a hard time swallowing and talking at times. My speech, my broken body, my scars. For those of you watching the video, you can see the scars on my neck that are evidence of the brokenness of my body. And what's on the outside is very much what's on the inside as well, the inside of my body. But more than the physical evidences of my limp are the internal, the things that other people may not see. And this, I've long for my whole life dealt with chronic insecurity and a deep-seated fear of being left all alone, this fear of being abandoned and being unloved. That's been a driving motive in my life. As I talked about earlier with my Enneagram 2, I have to constantly ask myself, am I doing this service? Am I helping this person? Am I doing this thing because I'm trying to be loved, or am I doing it because I love them? And I'm having to work to get really, really healthy about that. But this has been a limp. This is a limp in my life that I carry around with me. But like Jacob, I'm learning to see God's face in my pain. In the story of Jacob, he names that place where he wrestled with God. When he wrestled with God there by the river, and when God blesses him, and he gets that wrench in his leg. It's in Genesis 32. I'll read this whole section. That night, Jacob got up and took 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Jacob called, this is verse 30, so Jacob called the place Peniel, Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. That is Jacob. What is so meaningful to me personally about that story of Jacob is that after that long night of wrestling with God, what Jacob didn't remember was the wrestling or the limp. He remembered the face of God. What he chose to memorialize, what he chose to focus on is that in the middle of all of that difficulty, the hardship, the questions, the wrestling, the pain, he chose to focus on the face of God. And through my experience, through my story, I am learning to find the face of God in my pain. For example, I am learning, I'm seeing over and over again, I see how my limp connects me with other limpers, for lack of a better way to say it. For example, I heard from a mom who gave birth to a child that was born with a cleft lip and palate. And she said, seeing that I show up and speak in spite of my functional disabilities, my speech disabilities, gives her hope for her child. I would never have had the opportunity to connect with this person with their limp if I didn't have a limp of my own. I meet people all the time who have difficulty with speech or swallowing or eating that feel like they're not alone because I share my story. I meet people who connect with me in my limp of fear, constantly living not knowing how long I have left. That limp of mine connects with the limp of others. I also see how my own brokenness connects me with my children and their struggle. The fact that I don't have it all together gives my young children who are dealing with their own hard stories permission to not always have it all together. I am hopeful, and I hear this from my grown children as well, that my ability to acknowledge that I still have things to learn, my ability to apologize and take ownership of ways that I haven't always been healthy is also helping them to see how they can do the same themselves. I also see how my limp makes me vastly more aware of my dependence on God. I cannot do this life alone. I have no ability to be utterly self-sufficient and independent. And the fact that I live with this broken body is constantly reminding me, and broken spirit at times, reminds me of my absolute utter dependence on God. But it also reminds me of my dependence on others. We need each other. And my awareness of my own needs helps me to create space for the needs of others too. But I also see how my limp makes me long for heaven. Just like Jacob saw the face of God through his long, dark night of wrestling, I am seeing evidence of God's presence in how my limp makes me long for heaven. I am no longer so infatuated with this life that I don't have time to consider the one to come. My suffering and pain and my difficulty is almost like God's whisper in my ear saying, don't forget, the best is yet to come. This is not all there is. There's more ahead, Michele. Don't put all your eggs in this earthly basket. I have something far better to come. All of these ways that my limp is blessing me is evidence of God's presence here. Just like Jacob memorialized God's presence in the long, dark night of his wrestling with God, it's now your turn to do the same. You and I can find altar stones when God meets us exactly where we are. There's an altar stone there. When God chooses to show up, when we sleep next to a river at dark and we wrestle with him till morning, God meets us in that place. We need to memorialize it. Because sometimes we forget that God actually meets us in the place of pain. Henry Nouwen said, ultimately, mourning means facing what wounds us in the presence of one who can heal. Ultimately, mourning, mourning, ultimately, mourning means facing what wounds us in the presence of one who can heal. I just love that so much. So, now, I want you to look for God's presence in your limp. This is your altar stone number 3. I want you to think of the ways that you are broken in this life. Maybe nobody else sees it. Maybe it's just a tendency you have, kind of like my tendency to exhaust myself taking care of my family because I'm trying to make sure that they still love me. I'm much healthier than I was, but I still slip into that pattern so easily. Maybe your limp is something like that, but maybe it's something more significant. Maybe it's an abuse you suffered that has marked you. Maybe it's a physical challenge, a physical flaw. Maybe it's a fear that you deal with. Maybe it's chronic depression. Whatever it is, I want you to wrestle with God in it. I want you to look for the face of God in the place of your pain. I want you to allow God to show you himself there, to allow you to meet you. I want you to allow God to meet you as you wrestle with him through the dark. Okay? God meets you there. And your limp isn't the beginning of your disqualification. It's your first step toward healing. It's your first step toward learning to see God's face in the place of your pain. So today, all I want you to do is to sit somewhere for 5 minutes, close your eyes, and simply say, God, I'm yours. Open my eyes. Help me to see your presence in the place of my pain. Help me to see what you might be doing or accomplishing in my limp. And rather than see my limp as a place of disqualification from you, help me to see my limp as a place where you are seeing more clearly than anywhere else. All right? 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And ask him to meet you there. Thank you, friends, for joining me today. Life is so much sweeter when we don't have to do it alone. Even better, we have a God who will never leave us. He said, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. It's a promise. And I believe him. Now, that's something worth living for. Are you aching for a love that will never leave? A presence that will push back the dark? If so, I have good news for you. God's love is relentless, even when your faith isn't. And the circumstances you fear might drown your faith could become the stones giving testimony to it. Join me, and let's find evidence of him together.